Mountain Man hired her and her fat daughter only to cook. He never meant to fall for her daughter. "I only hired you two to cook, not to stir up my peace," the Mountain Man said coldly. But fate had other plans. Caleb Cal Blackwood stood at the door of his Pine Valley cabin, a man carved from stone and sorrow. 3 winters had passed since the avalanche that stole his wife and son, leaving him with only his axe, his men, and the silence of the mountains. He wasn't looking for company, and certainly not from a talkative widow and her overweight daughter. Before him stood Catherine Sullivan, thin and weary, her hands trembling as she held her bonnet. Beside her was Rosemary. Rose, her 22-year-old daughter, a plump young woman with round cheeks, soft brown curls, and eyes so gentle they almost apologized for existing. Cal's gaze hardened. "I said 1 cook, not 2. Kate swallowed. "Sir, Rose is a good worker. We share the job and the pay. We'll cause no trouble." Rose lowered her head, clutching the basket in her arms. "Please, sir, we just need a chance." The firelight flickered in Cal's eyes as he studied them. He could tell they hadn't eaten properly in days. But his voice stayed cold. "Fine, but I pay for one, and you follow my rules, meals on time, no noise, no questions." As the 2 women stepped inside, the scent of ash and pine filled the room. Neither realized that this cabin, built for one man's grief, was about to become the heart of something he thought he'd buried forever. And Cal, who had sworn never to love again, was about to meet the woman who would teach him warmth through food, and her daughter, who would heal him through love. The next morning, the mountains were cloaked in mist, and the faint scent of bacon drifted from the kitchen. Cal awoke to something he hadn't felt in years, the warmth of a home that smelled alive. Downstairs, Kate worked the stove, her hands moving with precision learned from hardship. But it was Rose who caught his attention. She hummed softly as she kneaded bread dough, her rounded cheeks flushed from the fire, her hair escaping in soft curls that framed her face. Cal stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're up early." Rose startled, nearly dropping the dough. "Good morning, sir. I thought the men would want hot bread before sunrise." Her voice was soft, timid, as if afraid that every word might annoy him. Cal grunted. "The men eat whatever's put in front of them." "Yes, sir," she murmured, turning back to her work. He should have left, but he didn't. There was something oddly peaceful about the rhythm of her hands, the quiet concentration she carried. She moved slowly, carefully, but with purpose. When breakfast was served, the lumbermen devoured it like wolves. "Best meal we've had all season," one of them said, smacking his lips. Another nodded. "Whoever made those biscuits ought to stay forever." Cal tried to hide his approval, but as he tasted the food, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Who made this?" he asked casually. "Rose," Kate said, smiling. "My daughter's got her grandmother's hands." Cal didn't answer, but later, as he split logs outside, he caught himself thinking about those hands, small, flour-dusted, and kind. Days turned into weeks, and the house began to change. Rose scrubbed windows, fixed the broken pantry door, and even patched torn shirts for the lumber crew. She didn't complain, not even when her feet ached or when Cal barked orders. At night, he often found her in the kitchen, still working by lamplight. "Don't you ever stop?" he asked one evening. Rose smiled shyly. "Work keeps me from thinking too much." "About what?" "About people who said I wasn't good enough." Her words hit something deep inside him. Cal looked at her then, really looked, not at the weight she carried, but at the strength beneath it. The next morning he caught the men teasing her gently about her size. She only laughed, serving them coffee with a grace that silenced mockery. But when she turned away, Cal saw her blink back tears. That night he found her alone behind the cabin, staring at the stars. "You shouldn't let them get to you," he said quietly. She smiled without looking at him. "They didn't mean harm. It's been like that my whole life. People laugh, and I pretend it doesn't hurt." Something in her voice, soft, honest, brave, stirred the part of him he thought had frozen long ago. He didn't say a word. Instead, he took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. When she looked up, surprised, he simply said, "It's cold. Don't catch a chill." Then he turned and walked back inside, leaving Rose breathless, not from the mountain air, but from the quiet kindness of a man who didn't yet realize he was falling for her. Winter deepened over Pine Valley, blanketing the mountains in silence and snow. The lumbermen worked long days in the frozen forest, and Cal often rode out early to supervise, leaving the cabin to the two women. But every evening, when he returned to the glow of the hearth and the smell of fresh bread, something in him began to thaw. Rose had a way of turning the bleakest days into warmth. She filled the kitchen with soft laughter and humming, her cheeks rosy from the oven heat. Sometimes Cal would linger near the doorway, pretending to check his gloves or clean his rifle, when in truth he just wanted to listen. One night, after a long storm, the team of workers was stranded at a distant camp, leaving the cabin eerily quiet. Cal returned home soaked and exhausted. The fire had burned low, but Rose was still awake, sitting by the hearth and mending a torn coat. "You should have gone to bed," he muttered. "I was waiting," she said simply. "For what?" "For you. You looked tired this morning." Cal froze, unsure what to say. No one had waited for him in years. No one had cared whether he came home or not. When Rose stood to fetch him a towel, her hand brushed his arm, and something electric passed between them. He stepped back quickly, his pulse uneven. "You shouldn't—" "I know," she whispered. "You're my employer." They stared at each other in the half-light, the air thick with things neither dared to say. Then Cal turned away, breaking the spell. "Get some rest, Rose. Tomorrow will be long." The following week brought more storms, and one near tragedy. While carrying firewood to the shed, Rose slipped on the ice and twisted her ankle badly. Cal heard her cry out and ran outside, finding her on the ground, snow clinging to her hair. "Don't move," he ordered, kneeling beside her. "I'm fine," she said through gritted teeth. "You're not." He scooped her up effortlessly, ignoring her protests. "You'll only make it worse." Inside, he placed her gently on the couch. Kate rushed over, worried, but Cal had already rolled up Rose's skirt to check the swelling around her ankle. His large, calloused hands were careful, almost reverent. "It's not broken," he murmured, "but you'll need to rest for a few days." She tried to sit up. "I can't. The men need—" "I'll handle it," he interrupted firmly. "You've done enough." For the next 3 days he tended to her himself, cooking simple meals, bringing her tea, and keeping the fire stoked through the night. Kate watched in quiet astonishment. The man who'd once barked orders now moved around her daughter like a protector, afraid to breathe too loud. One evening, Rose stirred awake to find Cal sitting nearby, mending a broken chair leg. "You're doing my job now," she teased softly. He smiled, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "You've spoiled me. I can't eat canned beans any more." They both laughed quietly, and the moment stretched, tender and unguarded. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked after a pause. His eyes lifted to hers, full of something heavy and real. "Because you remind me what kindness looks like." Her throat tightened. "People don't usually say that about me." "They should," he said. "You bring warmth wherever you go." For a long time they sat together by the fire, listening to the snow tap against the windows. It felt safe, dangerously safe. When Rose could walk again, Cal avoided her. He threw himself into work, stayed longer in the woods, spoke only when necessary. But the distance only made her miss him more. One evening, as the men finished dinner, Kate leaned over to Rose and whispered, "You know, dear, he looks at you like a man starving for sunlight." "Mama?" Rose blushed furiously. Kate chuckled. "I'm old, not blind." That night, when Cal passed through the kitchen, Rose found herself staring after him, at the way his shoulders filled the doorway, the quiet strength in every step. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew the truth. She had fallen for the man who'd once been too broken to love again. And in some corner of his heart, beneath the scars and the silence, Cal Blackwood was falling just as hard. The winter dragged on, and the mountain became both their prison and their sanctuary. The lumber crew came and went with the seasons, but in the cabin, life settled into a rhythm, quiet, steady, and unexpectedly tender. Every morning, Rose rose before dawn, lighting the stove and brewing coffee strong enough to wake even the coldest bones. Cal would appear shortly after, boots thudding across the floorboards, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," he'd mutter. "Coffee's ready," she'd reply, smiling softly. Sometimes their fingers brushed as she handed him his cup. The first few times he pulled away like the touch burned him, but slowly, almost without realizing, he stopped moving back. Cal had built the cabin with his own hands after losing his family. It had been a place of silence, a shrine to grief. But under Rose's care, it began to change. She hung curtains made from old flour sacks, polished the windows, planted herbs by the kitchen wall. She even found his late wife's old rocking chair and fixed the loose leg. One afternoon, Cal found her sitting in it, sewing by the window as sunlight poured over her hair. "You shouldn't waste time fixing old things," he said quietly. She looked up. "I don't think it's a waste to bring something back to life." He didn't know how to answer that. That evening, he stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her hum while she cooked. The smell of stew filled the cabin, warm and rich. For the first time in years, he didn't dread returning home. But peace never came without ghosts. Sometimes, when the fire dimmed, Rose would catch Cal staring into the flames, his face shadowed with memories. Once, she asked softly, "Do you still think about her, your wife?" He didn't look at her. "Every day. Some days less than others." "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Remembering her isn't pain anymore. It's something else." Rose hesitated. "Then what am I to you?" He looked up, startled by the question. The firelight danced across her face, soft, open, waiting. "You're—" he began, but his throat closed around the word. She smiled sadly. "It's all right, Cal. You don't have to say anything." But later that night, When she thought he'd gone to bed, she found a small wildflower placed on her windowsill, still fresh despite the frost. In March, tragedy nearly struck again. Kate fell ill with pneumonia, her breathing shallow and weak. Rose didn't leave her side, and Cal, seeing her desperation, rode through a snowstorm to fetch medicine from the valley. He returned at dawn, half frozen, his hands raw from the cold. "Give her this," he said, placing a vial in Rose's trembling hands. "Twice a day, until her fever breaks." She stared at him through tears. "You risked your life for us." He smiled faintly. "Wasn't planning on losing you both." When Kate finally recovered, she took Cal's hand and whispered, "You've done more for my daughter than I ever could. Don't waste time hiding what's already clear." Cal avoided Rose for days after that, terrified of what he felt, and even more terrified of what it meant. But one evening, as she stirred soup over the fire, he broke his silence. "You make it impossible to stay cold," he said abruptly. She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He stepped closer, voice low and raw. "I built this place to forget how to feel, and you walk in with your laughter, your kindness, your damned heart. And now I can't stop feeling everything again." Her eyes filled with tears. "If that's a curse, I'll carry it with you." Something inside him cracked wide open. He reached for her hand, and this time he didn't let go. From then on, their bond deepened quietly, naturally, as if the mountain itself approved. He showed her how to split firewood properly. She taught him how to bake bread without burning it. On clear days, they walked to the frozen lake where he taught her how to skip stones across the ice. She laughed each time she failed, her joy echoing through the valley like music. At night, after the lamps dimmed, Cal often lay awake listening to her gentle breathing from the next room. The ache in his chest wasn't loneliness anymore. It was something far softer, far more dangerous. And one evening, as snow fell quietly outside, Rose said the words he'd been too afraid to speak. "Cal," she whispered, "you don't have to carry your pain alone anymore. We're here, Mama and I. We're your family now." He looked at her then, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were alive. He reached out, brushed his thumb across her cheek, and said, almost to himself, "Family. Yeah, that sounds about right." The fire crackled softly beside them, and the storm outside raged on. But inside that small cabin, warmth had finally won. Spring crept slowly over Pine Valley. The snow melted from the ridges, the river swelled, and the cabin came alive with the scent of pine and damp earth. Rose planted wildflowers along the porch, while Cal repaired the roof, and laughter, real, unguarded laughter, returned to a place that had known only silence. But peace never lasts long in the mountains. One afternoon, a man rode up the trail, sharp suit, polished boots, and a cruel smirk that didn't belong in the wilderness. Cal stepped out onto the porch, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "You're a long way from town," he said flatly. The man dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. "Name's Henry Sullivan. I'm looking for my wife and daughter." Rose froze at the sound of that voice. Her hands trembled. The dish she was holding slipped and shattered on the floor. Kate stepped forward, pale as a ghost. "Henry," she whispered, "you have no right—" "Oh, but I do." Henry's smile turned venomous. "You left me, Kate, took my daughter, and ran off with the money meant to pay our debts. That's theft." Cal's jaw tightened. They don't owe you anything, Henry sneered. And who are you, mountain man? Another fool playing hero? You think I won't drag them back down that trail myself? Before Cal could respond, Rose stepped between them. You'll do no such thing. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with fire. You never cared about us, Father. You beat Mama. You gambled away everything, and you sold me like livestock. Henry's hand twitched toward his belt, but Cal moved faster. The click of his rifle echoed like thunder. Touch them, he growled, and I'll make sure this mountain is your grave. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Henry smirked and spat into the dirt. You'll regret crossing me, Blackwood. The law's on my side. He mounted his horse and rode off, but the echo of his words lingered long after. That night, Rose sat by the fire, shaken. He'll come back, she said softly. He always does. Cal crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. Not while I'm breathing. You can't fight the law, Cal. He could say anything, that you kidnapped us, that we stole from him. I don't care. His voice was low but steady. You're not leaving this mountain, not for him, not for anyone. Kate, sitting nearby, looked at them with tired eyes. He'll find a way. Men like Henry always do. Maybe it's time we told the truth. Cal frowned. What truth? Kate took a deep breath. Rose isn't just my daughter. She's also his shame. Henry had another woman once, a servant girl he used and abandoned. When she died, I took Rose in as my own. Rose's breath caught. Mama, you never told me. I wanted to protect you, Kate said, tears in her eyes. But he's after you because of what you carry. Your real mother's deed to land near Silver Ridge. That's what he wants. Cal's fists clenched. Then we'll make sure he never gets it. Over the next few days, Cal prepared for trouble. He reinforced the doors, sharpened tools into weapons, and posted watch near the ridge. Rose tried to stay busy, but fear gnawed at her. You don't have to fight my battles, she said one night as they sat by the fire. He turned to her, eyes fierce. Don't you understand? You are my battle. She stared at him, breath catching. Why? Because you gave me something worth fighting for again. The air between them shimmered with unspoken feeling. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his cheek. Then promise me, she whispered. Promise you'll come back to me, no matter what happens. He covered her hand with his own, rough and warm. I will. You have my word. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. A storm was coming, and it would test every promise they'd made. The storm hit 3 nights later. Rain lashed against the cabin walls, wind howled through the pines, and thunder rolled like gunfire in the dark. Cal barely slept. He knew Henry Sullivan would use the chaos to strike. Cowards always did. Just before dawn, the sound came, hooves crunching over wet gravel, followed by men's voices. Cal grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. Lightning flashed, illuminating 4 riders behind Henry. Step aside, Blackwood, Henry shouted over the rain. Those women belong to me. Not anymore, Cal growled, aiming down the sights. You cross this line, you don't come back. Henry laughed. You really think you can stop me? The law says they're mine, my wife, my property. And the deed her little secret holds is worth more than your damn life. Cal's eyes narrowed. You're not taking them. I buried one family already. I won't lose another. Henry raised his pistol. The gunshot cracked through the storm. Cal dove behind a post, splinters flying. From inside, Rose screamed. Cal! Stay inside, he barked. Don't open that door. The fight erupted. Cal returned fire, forcing 2 of Henry's men off their horses. Lightning flashed again, and he saw Henry dismount, creeping toward the cabin with a knife glinting in his hand. Cal charged through the mud, tackling him hard. The 2 men rolled in the rain, fists slamming, boots slipping. Henry swung wildly, cutting Cal's arm. Cal roared, pain fueling his fury, and slammed him into the ground. "You think she wants you?" Henry spat, a broken old man clinging to another man's leftovers. Cal's knuckles crashed into his jaw. "She's worth 10 of you." Henry's hand reached for the knife again, but a voice stopped him. "Let him go." Rose stood on the porch, trembling but steady, holding Cal's revolver in both hands. Rain plastered her curls to her face, but her eyes blazed. "Rose, get inside!" Cal shouted. She didn't move. "No, I'm done hiding." Henry sneered. "You won't shoot me, girl." Her finger tightened. "Try me." He lunged forward, and the gun fired. The echo swallowed the storm. Henry fell to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing into the mud. The rain washed his blood away, leaving only silence. Rose dropped the gun, shaking. Cal rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered. "It's done." She buried her face in his chest, sobbing. "He would have killed you." He held her tighter. "Not while you're here to stop him." Thunder rolled one last time, then faded into quiet. The mountain breathed again, and for the first time, Cal realized what peace truly meant. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of someone worth living for. The storm passed by morning. The world outside was washed clean, the mud glistening, the pine trees dripping silver in the sunlight. Cal buried Henry behind the ridge, far from the cabin, far from the people he'd tried to destroy. There were no words spoken, only a final handful of earth and a quiet sigh of relief. When he returned, Rose was sitting by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Her face was pale but calm. She looked up as he entered. "It's really over," she said softly. He nodded. "It's over." For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of fire, gentle and warm. Then Rose rose to her feet and crossed the room. "You shouldn't have faced him alone," she whispered. "I didn't," Cal replied. "You were there. You stood your ground." Her eyes glistened. "I was so afraid." "So was I," he admitted. "But fear means there's something left to lose, and I wasn't about to lose you." Tears slipped down her cheeks. He reached up and brushed them away with a rough thumb, his hand trembling. "You've changed everything, Rose. This place, my life. You made me remember what it means to live." She smiled through her tears. "And you made me believe I could be loved just as I am." He leaned in then, closing the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle, steady, and certain, like the promise of spring after a long, bitter winter. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, pouring gold over Pine Valley. Inside, warmth filled the cabin, not from the fire, but from 2 hearts that had finally found home. Every time I share stories like this, I'm reminded how love can bloom in the most unlikely places. A lonely cabin, a broken heart, or even between 2 people who thought they'd never be worthy of it again. Cal didn't mean to fall for Rose, but sometimes fate chooses for us. And maybe that's the beauty of it. Love that finds you when you're too tired to search. If you've ever been told you're too much, too different, or too late for love, this story is for you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight?